Hello and welcome to the We Need Water podcast. My name is Michael Brent and I'm the Water Resources Manager for Cascade Water Alliance in King County, Washington. Cascade is a municipal water supplier providing drinking water to more than 380,000 residents. I'm glad you're here. I want you to truly care about this resource and make it your personal mission to become a steward of water. Our topic today is lawn removal, and our guest is Jessi Bloom. Jessi is an arborist, author, and landscape designer. She was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest and has a strong background in horticultural and the environmental sciences. In early 2000, she decided to start an ethical business in the green industry to fill a niche for organic and ecological landscaping. The Seattle Times named her a rock star in the ecological gardening movement. She led Northwest Bloom to numerous environmental awards, traveling nationwide as a speaker, and is a best-selling author. Her books include Free-Range Chicken Gardens, Practical Permaculture Garden Design, and Creating Sanctuaries, Sacred Garden Spaces, Plant-Based Medicine and Daily Practices to Achieve Happiness and Well-Being. Jessi's work has been featured in many national and local media outlets, including the New York Times, Better Homes and Gardens, Sunset Magazine, Disney, Martha Stewart Living, Mother Earth News, UTNE Reader, Fine Gardening Magazine, and PBS's Growing a Greener World TV. Welcome, Jessi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for being here today. So I'm excited about this topic. I keep hearing more and more about this idea of lawn removal, turf removal. So let's get right into it. Why should someone care about this? Why should someone want to remove their lawn?
Well, I can think of a lot of reasons. The most important reasons in my mind are water conservation, of course. A lot of water is wasted in lawn care. And unnecessarily here in the Pacific Northwest. Honestly, we don't really need to water our lawns, but there's an aesthetic that people are trying to uphold throughout our drought period when we really need that water for other things. So that's A. B, it's kind of an ecological desert, so to speak. We don't really need lawns from an ecosystem standpoint. In fact, they're usually pretty sterile depending on how they're cared for. But lawns are not a natural thing in the environment. They're actually a completely man-made concept that we struggle and use resources to maintain. And so I can think of 100 ideas for any one lawn if we were to remove it, but lawn really limits the imagination. And it just takes up a lot of space for other things that we could be growing, like food for our families and habitat for wildlife. So it's good in some cases. I'm not going to be a complete lawn hater here. It's just all about how it's used or how it's grown, how it's maintained. But for some people, lawn is just easier. At least that's the original idea of like, well, just put lawn seed out and then all you have to do is mow it. But there's a lot of other things that we can be doing with that space and not having to fight with nature so much to make it something that it's never going to be naturally.
That's what I always think of with lawn care is how much work it is, how much effort it is to achieve that aesthetic that you talk about. You mentioned the term biological desert. I think that and I come across that a lot as well in terms of the biodiversity of a lawn compared to pretty much any other kind of landscape is very limiting.
Mm-hmm. It also, depending on how it's cared for, how healthy the soil is, it can act almost impervious and create more stormwater runoff than a healthy, deeper rooted landscape. So there's a lot of reasons to get rid of lawns. We primarily help people remove lawns in our work, but if someone's not ready to entirely remove their lawn, they can at least remove parts of it or the areas that they struggle with or aren't doing well. So,
well, let's start with that. Say I'm looking at it. all of the area of my landscape that is in lawn, and I have a front yard, a backyard, and some around the side. How would I go about deciding what part of that is a good candidate for removal?
Well, I often come across people who, and this is a completely like different thing for every single person, but someone who hates moss in their lawn, for example. I love
Mhm.
moss, so I'm not a moss hater either. But if you struggle getting lawn to grow, it's probably because it's not going to ever be happy there. And so
Mhm.
adding products or adding to it isn't necessarily going to solve it. It might band-aid it for one season, but we usually remove lawn mostly in side yards where there's not enough sun. So lawn needs 6 hours of sunlight. That's pretty much a rule of thumb. Direct sunlight too, which is full sun, and most side yards don't have that. Anywhere on the north side of a building, generally lawn is not going to do very well because it needs that sunlight and it's blocked for much of the year by the building. So if there's any kind of struggle, if there's a lot of heavy use, that's the other thing. It's a lot better to have a pathway that you have a lot of traffic on, be like gravel or wood
Mhm.
chips or pavers or stone, something that can hold that traffic a little bit more than wearing a depression in a lawn or creating drainage problems. Because every time we're walking on lawn, we're compacting the soil, which is inhibiting the roots from growing well, inhibiting water from going deeper into the soil. So if we are in a high traffic area, consider pathways instead of lawn.
Okay. As you were talking, it reminded me of something. When I was in high school, I had a neighbor, older couple, and I did a lot of landscaping for them, or I mowed their lawn. I kind of helped take care of things as they got older. And they had huge oak trees in their backyard, and but it was also lawn back there, and had a terrible problem keeping the grass growing.
Mhm.
It was forever dying. Again and again, I remember they would have sod rolled out there, and would just water the heck out of
Yeah.
it, but it would never live. It
Yeah.
would, it would eventually it would die. It wouldn't last too long, and so
Mhm.
the gentleman at one eventually decided the problem was just there was just too much shade from the oak trees, so he wanted me to cut off some of the lower limbs, and these were big oak trees,
Yeah.
massive oak trees. And so I was up there sawing off limbs. And long story short, I got knocked off the ladder and
Oh no.
I broke my wrist into a hundred pieces. Got a trip to the ER there, and when the weather turns, I can still feel that a little bit.
All
So
for
I got
lawn.
some personal skin in the game in there. But even back then, when I was young and I didn't know anything, I still, I never said this to him because he was a nice person and a good friend, but I still remember thinking, why do you care so much? I mean, who cares if you have grass
Mhm.
right up to the tree in this area? The trees are just too big and they want the space, I think. But it gets back to that idea, I think, of the aesthetic. And that's just how a lot of us have been raised and how we think our yard should look.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a cultural and generational expectation that lawn is perceived as someone that has their stuff together. If you have a nice lawn, you're well off. You take good care of your things. But I think that's shifting pretty rapidly as have more environmental awareness. Younger people are
Hmm.
like, what's the point of this? I don't want to spend money on taking care of something that I don't need. And lawn, again, it's just not a natural thing. There's no such thing as lawn in nature. And so we're
That's right.
creating this concept and we're cutting down trees, really battling nature and the natural systems to make it work. And I see that as a major design flaw. I would rather
Right.
make sure there's no lawn right up to even the drip line of the oak tree, because the oak tree is competing with that lawn and the root zone of the
Hmm.
lawn. And so they're both getting less of what they need because they're competing with each other. And there, nowhere in nature is there a perfectly cut lawn and a tree sticking out. It's just not ever going to work. And that's true for here in the Pacific Northwest, our conifers. Moss will grow under our trees. And that's just an expectation that we all have to have, that weeds will come in, that mosses will come in, that it's going to get, a little bit soggy in the winter time when we have giant storms of rainwater. So I think loosening our expectations is a big part of this. But also just coming up with better ideas. Like if I'm going to water my plants in the summer, they better give me food or feed someone else. That's kind of how I look at it. I'm not going to water grass, especially here where it goes dormant, and yeah, it might turn yellow, but the second we get cool weather in the fall, it's just going to green right back up again. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They have to be taught because they come from warmer climates, or that's just something their neighborhood association tells them they have to do. So education is a big part of this, I think.
Right. And if you've ever been, say, to the Midwest, to the plain states where there still are some, not a lot, but some natural grasslands that are left in the summertime, as you say, that they go dormant. That's what they're supposed to do. They're not nice and emerald green all summer long. They go into dormancy.
Yeah, a lot of those grasslands and prairies are very biodiverse, though, and because they're allowed to go dormant, they achieve the natural cycle of a grass plant, which is to drop its seeds and to be regenerated in that sense. And then the roots are also able to grow deeper. So in how we care for lawns right now, we're actually doing the plant a huge disservice by cutting it all the time and then also watering it, not allowing it to reproduce. The concept of natural like meadowscaping is a cool concept as well. It's not maintenance free by any means, but it definitely increases biodiversity and ecological habitat, as well as the services like water absorption and all of those benefits of a grassland or prairie scape out in the Midwest. We don't have too many of them in the Northwest. And how succession works, our tree species move into those grasslands and they slowly turn into a forest.
Well, very good. So if you've identified some area on your property, in your landscape that you would like to grass you would like to remove, how do you begin with that? What's the starting point?
Well, there's a lot of options. The first thing that you can do, if you don't want to have to remove all that biomass and you have some time to kill, is to sheet mulch it or smother it in some way. So using cardboard, we use burlap a lot, and then covering it with wood chips and letting it just sit. The plant can't photosynthesize, it exhausts its root systems, and then it dies. That prepares the soil for planting in the future as well. But it takes several months, sometimes up to like 6 months, depending on the season you get started in. The other options, like mechanical removal, you have lots of tools to choose from, much more physical labor, and then it needs to be hauled away or something needs to happen to it. We own a sod cutter, easy to rent. Like any rental yard is going to have one. It's pretty inexpensive, but what it is, it's like a kind of a clunky giant lawnmower that has a blade, and it goes right below the surface of the lawn, and it just cuts a nice clean roll, and you can roll it up, throw it in your wheelbarrow and haul it away. That is quick, and I think the lightest amount of work in terms of lawn removal. We just had to do some in a tight area that we used pickaxes and flat shovels, and that works.
Okay.
It's just a little bit.
It doesn't sound easy.
Yeah, it's a workout for sure. So you kind of have to decide, like, do I have more time or do I have more physical strength? And which is more important. But for anyone who's like wanting to get started like this spring, I would highly recommend using a sod cutter. If you have some time and maybe you want to plant in the fall when it feels a little bit more appropriate to do like restoration type of plantings, Going in and sheet mulching is a really great option because it's just bringing in more biomass to smother it. It's not hauling it all away. And then the
Okay.
last option that I don't recommend, and some folks do, but I'm just a really strong anti-pesticide user. There's herbicides that people will spray, and
Hmm.
the problem with that is they are persistent, stay in the soil, and often kill organisms in the soil as well, which and can also pollute our groundwater and any surface water. So, not a huge fan of that method. It's also, if you have kids or wildlife in the area, pets, there's a risk there for them having
Of course.
exposure. So sod cutting, it's like maybe $100 to rent it for 4 hours, something like that. And it just makes it quick and easy. Like you just walk behind a machine and then roll it up. But it's a little bit of a
How
challenge to
much?
navigate and like move it around.
Oh, I can imagine. I've never used a sod cutter. I've used lots of other, machinery like that, dethatchers and tillers and so forth, but never have used a sod cutter. But I would imagine you're probably going to generate quite a bit of sod
Mhm.
uh, from that. So if you wanted to take out, say, uh, 100 square feet of your lawn, and you use the sod cutter. So, can you give some idea of the scale of that when you have all that removed and rolled up? Would it fit in the bed of a pickup truck,
100 square feet? Oh, yeah.
or
Yeah. I
yeah?
mean, we can talk specifics of truck sizes too, but
Well, sure, that matters.
yeah, if you, depending on the time of year also, so this is kind of like right now we're removing sod and it's still pretty mucky and wet. When you do it in the
Hmm.
summertime or when it's a little bit drier, you can shake a lot of the soil out. One of the downsides of a sod cutter is you actually are hauling away or moving that biomass when it's actually an
Ah,
important part of the soil. And if you smother it, that biomass stays in place and all the organisms
okay,
as well.
that
Um,
makes sense.
another method of smothering is using plastics. We do this sometimes when we're trying to get rid of, like, especially where it's like mossy or in full baking sun, and it's a little bit quicker than sheet mulching. But we use the plastic over and over again. It can be kind of wasteful if you're just doing it once and
Right.
you accumulate all this garbage. But solarizing the soil with that plastic will kill it a little bit faster.
Faster, I assume, than regular sheet
Yeah.
mulching that you talked
Yeah,
about.
especially in the
Okay.
summertime.
So you've got those two basic methods, some form of smothering the grass or cutting the sod out. Um, what do you have to do if you've used sheet mulching? What do you have to do in terms of preparation after the grass has died?
Not much. Plant.
No, it's
There's
just
not much to
okay.
do after that. I mean,
You don't have to remove anything after that. The plant material has died, decomposed, and you're ready to go.
well, yeah, there's some technical stuff I could get into that depending on like where a curb is or like the hardscaping edge. A lot of times, so if you say like have a sidewalk right here and the lawn
Hmm.
kind of does this, you don't necessarily want to sheet mulch 6 inches up, right? Because you're just going to have it spilling on. So a lot of times at hard edges, we'll excavate like, I don't know, 6 inches to a
Okay.
foot, just so that the sheet mulch can kind of lay in it and not cause erosion problems. Anywhere where you're going thin, you run the risk of having regrowth. And a lot of people who use cardboard, you have to overlay it so that the joints of the cardboard aren't open. Some
Hmm.
grass is really strong and will push right through if it's not smothered well enough. And I think of it like in growing up with like kiddie pools, you'd put a kiddie pool out in the lawn, and then at the end of the summer,
Hmm.
it was just like this big circle of dead grass. The idea is there's weight and darkness. And if you have enough weight and darkness, then the grass will die. But if you go too thin, like say you have wood chips and they're only like 2 inches thin, that's just not enough. The grass can actually push through it and
Right.
just be happy it's got the blanket for the winter. But yeah, you have to think about timing the edges and how thick you're going.
Okay. Now, if you just come in a long afternoon and cut and remove the sod, though, um, do you have to do anything to that soil before you begin planting? Any sort of soil prep you want
Yeah.
to do?
Well, so knowing your soil is really important. But as a rule of thumb, as a professional company in the industry, we do 3 to 4 inches of amendment regardless.
Okay.
In most urban and suburban landscapes, that means we're using compost because there's not very much organic matter. In some landscapes that are really compact, maybe we might have a little bit more of a mixture, so like a 3-way or something like that. But it depends on what you're going to grow. So if you're going to be planting, big trees, you probably don't need a lot of amendment, maybe just a couple inches, and then it kind of gets
Hmm.
mixed in. The next layer after planting is then you want to mulch. Mulch is the like really the most important layer. But sometimes we do jobs where the soil just hasn't been touched for a really long time and it's actually in pretty good shape. And so we don't do a lot of amending and we just go heavy on the mulch. So when you sod cut, anytime you disturb the soil, what happens is the seed bank that lives in that soil is all of a sudden like, woo, we've got room to grow now. The grass is gone.
Hmm.
So you might get weed seeds or plants growing that you didn't know existed because you were mowing them all the time. So mulch will
Hmm.
help prevent those from taking off.
So it sounds like that you really can't overemphasize the importance of mulch. If you don't use a proper amount of mulch over this site that you've cleared, you're probably just going to end up with a big weed patch, I would assume.
Usually, yeah, give it time. That's just what nature does. If you disturb the soil, plants will start growing, whether you want them to or not. So the trick is decide which plants you want to grow and then make sure that they have the space they need and whatever they need to thrive while keeping the other plants at bay. And mulch is like I encourage mulch in every project, even, years later, just keep mulching until there's enough ground covers that the plants become the mulch and that their leaves are the things that is feeding the soil every year and protecting the root zone.
Hmm. And what depth should you try to achieve with the mulch?
We aim for 1 to 2 minimum. Um,
Okay.
it depends again, like if you're growing small plants, you might start with smaller layers. But it like certain mulches have different effects as well. So like wood chip mulch breaks down pretty slowly. It's pretty good for a weed preventative, but has very little nutrient content to it. So if you were growing food, for example, that might not be a good mulch. But if you grow
Hmm.
food and you use compost, which has a lot more nutrients in it, then it's going to also invite weed growth as well. So if mulch is designed in a way that complements what you're aiming for, then you'll be really well off. And you just think about in succession. That's where I always go is like, what is nature doing naturally in this phase of succession? So if I'm growing a forest, the mulch is the leaves and the falling and decayed wood material, right, from trees.
Hmm.
So wood chip mulch makes a lot of sense. But in a garden where we're trying to actively cultivate food, compost or a compost type is a really good option. And there's lots of variations in that as well, from manure based to yard waste to forest waste. So there's a lot of options. Mulch is a whole podcast in itself.
Sure. What kind of plants do you like? Assuming you weren't going to grow food,
Mhm.
what kind of plants do you recommend?
Most of my work starts with native plants, the
Hmm.
things that want to be here naturally and thrive, and that feed our local critters. So starting there is always a good idea in my mind. From that point, looking at plants for their seasonal attributes, or everybody has preferences, and this is something that I work with clients individually on, where if they like let's say fragrant plants or colorful plants, or I have clients that want a palette of certain colors and then they want those colors repeated throughout the year. So if it's like a pink and white flower scheme, then we'll pick out plants that do that. all year round. But thinking about year-round interest is important so that you have something interesting or beautiful all the time, and it's not just a barren landscape for winter, which feels like 8 months sometimes. But there's a lot of options. We were very blessed in this region because we have such a great climate to grow such a variety of plants.
And even though with native plants tend to be much more water efficient than grass, for example, you still need to be careful, be mindful the first 2 or 3 seasons, I would assume.
Definitely. The first 3 seasons is critical, and they need water regardless of if they're labeled drought tolerant or not. I think of them like little children, like you have to get them through their toddler years so they can survive, and they need you to water them. There's lots of irrigation methods, but you can't just plant and forget it, especially nowadays with 90-degree temperatures, 100-degree temperatures, like becoming more
Right.
regular. New plants will just fry in that without enough moisture.
So you definitely want to keep up on that. And in the height of summer, I would assume every day or two, something like that, you might need to
Well, when it comes
do some
to
watering.
irrigation, the soil type matters, and also the weather.
Mm.
So we do a lot of drip irrigation systems where there's a very specific amount of water that gets delivered to the root zone of the plant. And then that can be managed on an app, or sometimes those apps even align with weather apps. But there's never set it and forget it in my mind, because you always have, like this last weekend, it's March, and we had 75 degrees, which is
That's right.
it was record breaking, right?
Yeah.
And we have a nursery, we're already watering, which is, I don't think we've ever done before April before. So being able to monitor and track how the soil moisture levels are is actually where we start with water irrigation, making sure that if the soil is damp within 3 inches, I usually do a finger test. If it's
Hmm.
moist in that 3 inches, then you don't need to water. If it's
Okay.
dry, then you do. And that's something that you do have to monitor. Once you get familiar with the site and the plants, then you can usually pick out a pattern, like every day it's over 85. It's a water day, at least in the first
Mm.
year. And then in the second and third and consecutive years, you can water less and less. But you have to measure the moisture with your finger, or there's little devices you can buy also.
Sure. I meant to ask you this a moment ago, and I didn't. But if you cut the sod and you're going to just remove that, what can you do with that? Where can you take it?
There's a lot of recycling facilities. So most of the places that sell topsoil and mulch have recycling for green debris, and they'll actually
Mm.
compost it. I wouldn't take it to the dump or anything like that, but if you have a place in the landscape where you can use it, it can be somewhat valuable as a biomass and soil. Like if you wanted to create berms or hugel culture, or
Mm.
just add a little bit of extra soil. The thing is, if you don't want lawn in an area, just make sure it gets covered again, like sheet mulch over the top of it. So sometimes we'll create mounds with sod, and so we'll cut it, roll it up, and then stack it like little logs, and then throw some layers of soil on the top of it. And as it decomposes, it breaks down, but we don't lose that important biomass that
Mm.
is there already.
Right. Um, Other than the sod cutter, if you're going to go that route, are there any specialized tools you need to have for this kind of project?
I mean, shovels, rakes are helpful. We like pitchforks because you can get under the sod and kind of shake it and let all the
Mm.
loose soil fall. We try to keep as much soil on site as possible, but the really nice pitchforks are a good tool to have. Um, Flat shovels can get kind of the thinner areas. Hula hose, going through the list of tools we, but there's all kinds of tools. It's just a matter of what area needs to be picked versus cut with a hula hoe. Might depend on the root the root depth of the sod. Because if the sod is really happy, the roots are going to be a little bit thicker.
All right. What's a good end result for a turf removal project? I guess what expectations should a homeowner have if they want to take this on?
I think the idea that it's going to be less maintenance is true long term, but not necessarily right up front. I think for the first couple of years, everybody has to wrap their head around like it needs water, it's going to need a little bit of weeding, it's going to need some care. But after things are established, I think of the 3-year window like as the benchmark of success. After 3 years, you should be able to really notice a difference in not only like the amount of time you're spending, but how everything looks. Because you can buy tiny little plants, right? Or you can buy big ones. But 3 years, everything should be established enough and have developed a root zone to sustain itself if it's designed well. The part of the problem with lawn is it's usually just put in anywhere, and that's why people struggle with unhealthy lawn is it's in the wrong space. So we have to use the same principle of right plant, right place, put plants in the ground. Otherwise, the plants will struggle, right? So every plant is genetically designed to live in a certain climate naturally. And if we're trying to put a plant that, say, lives in California in a shady, dark, moist area, might not be so happy. So just making sure the plant's going to be happy where we're putting it will make a big difference.
All right. Any resources that you'd like to point people to, online resources, things like that? Anything you especially like or refer to?
Well, I refer to Chip Drop a lot to get wood chips for free, which is a great resource from tree companies and their debris that they're hauling away, give you a free mulch. That's an easy one. Great Plant Picks is kind of a fun website to play around with if you're looking for certain plants that do really well. The Native Plant Society. I don't know.
Well, those sound like good ones for sure. And I know the Chip Drop. That's a great service too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Jessi. I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always fun to share.
Thank you to all of you for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. If you did, please like and subscribe and follow us on the socials. You can also find helpful information about Cascade's water conservation programs at cascadewater.org. Have a great day, and remember, we need water.